You are listening to the APSE Podcast, the Association of People Supporting Employment First, with your host, Chris Davies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's been a while. We had a wonderful summer. I hope you did too. But we are back in action for Season 3, Episode 6 of the Minnesota APSE Podcast. And we couldn't be more delighted to have our guest here today, Shaiye. And Shaiye, great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Shaiye is a teacher, an author, and a career navigation coach, and has a lot of awesome stories to tell and philosophies. And really looking forward to diving in this with you today, Shaiye. As everybody knows, before we get too into it, we always like to talk a little bit about what Minnesota APSE stands for and National APSE, you know, what we're all about. Because if you're joining us for the first time, and we're very happy to have you if you are, or if you don't know a lot about APSE, which stands for the Association for People Supporting Employment First, we are the only membership organization, national membership organization that solely promotes competitive, integrated employment, real jobs, real wages for everyone. We believe everybody that wants to work can work. And the members of our organization believe that, and we do all sorts of things to promote that idea, and one of them is having a podcast like we're here today. So that's where you have you found your way to, Shaiye.
Yeah, I'm glad I did too.
Well, we're really glad you did too. I did a little research this morning on your website, learned just a little bit about you, and I'm very impressed with all the things that you've been up to, and looking forward to hearing more about that. Before we get into learning more about Shaiye, we just want to describe ourselves visually for anyone out there that would benefit from that. I am a white male. I'm bald, and so there's some synergy here, as you'll hear. And I keep it tight. I'm wearing just a typical long sleeve button down shirt today. I have a red beard as well, and I'm wearing blue jeans.
And I am, first things first, bald as well. I'm a black male. I am wearing dark sunglasses. I have a beard, which is also black. I'm wearing a baby blue or sky blue shirt. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so let's get into it. Shaiye, we'd love to learn, more about you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, so, first things first, I am disabled. I have several disabilities. I'm autistic with ADHD as well as complex PTSD. And I feel that it's important to lead with that because that is the thing that affects me most in my life and how I navigate the world. Background, I'm not from Minnesota. I came here in about 2017, but I grew up in Seattle. And I've always been into words, language. Language has always been a safe place for me. I've always wanted, to find quiet spaces. And so, reading was one of the best ways to do that. And that led me towards, disappearing into the worlds that I found in books, which eventually led me to writing. And in a long roundabout way, I eventually found a way to study writing, and I did that all the way to the master's level. Got an MFA in creative writing from the University of Minnesota. And I have written a book, You Borg Now, which was a Minnesota Book Award finalist in 2022. I can't remember. One of those two. Yeah. And I'm also a photographer. I've been more focused on that practice in my creative life lately, and I'm a disability advocate, and that's why I love doing things like this, because I am a late diagnosed with my disabilities. I only found out about 2 years ago, and so it's really important for me to talk about my life experiences so that if there's anyone out there that see similarities, they can perhaps go down the road of getting the correct diagnosis and getting the supports that they need.
If you're willing, I definitely want to talk about your book. But before we do, if you're willing, I'd love to hear more about how that experience was, finding out 2 years ago about your diagnoses, and how did you find out, and where did you go from there, and how has it changed your life?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed by another autistic person, which is very often how it happens. Initially. So I had an online Facebook friend. We met up in person. Within 5 minutes of being in space with me, she was like, "Do you know that you're autistic?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And that just led me down. I didn't know what she meant at first. I didn't know what it meant to be autistic, what it looked like, all of those things. So I just started doing research, started reading online about it, started seeing people's firsthand accounts, and I started seeing explanations for things that I had questions about my entire life, and nobody had, an explanation for it. Things such as simple as why I have a hard time with eye contact, why it's so hard for me with bright lights, and loud noises, and temperature changes, and a whole slew of other things, which everyone just chalked up to, everyone has something that's different about them. So once I confirmed it with myself, then I went down the road of trying to get a formal diagnosis, which was very challenging, because English is my second language. But my parents' English skills, they're adequate for sure. But they came to this country at a much older age than I did. So it's a lot harder to learn a language when you're older. So a lot of the, places that I called, I remember one place specifically, they were like, well, if we don't usually test for adults, but if we do, we would have to have the parents in the room. And we would need to ask them a lot of questions about their childhood and what they were like, what they did, etc., so that we can have more information. And I was like, well, my parents can, they can hold their own in English, but they're not going to be able to answer complex medical questions like that without an interpreter. And being a former medical interpreter myself, I'm like, I wouldn't want to be the one that's interpreting for them. That's against the code of ethics for interpreters and medical settings. And so it was a challenge to find a place that would just assess me without including my parents. And then eventually when I did, then it became an issue of, well, I do have insurance, but the insurance is not willing to pay for all of it, and finding money to be able to pay for the rest. And along the way, finding out about the ADHD, just from research and being like, I suspect that I might have that as well. Can you test for it? Turns out it's significantly harder to get insurance to pay for ADHD testing than autism testing, but it's all not fun. So that was a headache and a challenge, and it was an arduous process. And I think after I went through all that, the hardest part of the process was the actual diagnostic testing. It was like 4 hours of rigorous, intense neuropsychological evaluation, that was so deep and probing and just challenged me in so many bad ways that like I fell apart for at least 2 weeks afterwards. Like I was just a mess. And for a while I regretted getting the formal diagnosis, but then I was able to get accommodations. I was still finishing grad school at the time. I was able to get accommodations with that and get accommodations in workplace going forward. And also just, in a day-to-day thing, people wouldn't be like, oh, well, like we in the autistic community, we believe that self-diagnosis is valid. If another autistic person didn't recognize the same traits they see in themselves in me and didn't tell me, I would have never gone down this road. And I didn't go get the formal diagnosis because I didn't know I was autistic. I had already confirmed it before then. I knew for months. But I needed that because the outside world would not take me as seriously, and I would not get as much support as I need if I didn't have that. So ultimately, I think it was worth doing, but it's kind of a wash.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story, and I give you a lot of credit for it. Sounds like you really advocated for yourself to get what you need. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, Shaiye. So let's talk more about, I want to start with creative writing. You are an accomplished creative writer. You've written a book. You teach classes. A few moments ago when we were talking, you said that it's really your passion, creative writing. I'd love to hear more about that, how when you knew you were passionate about it, or how your passion developed towards creative writing.
Yeah, so, first and foremost, it was something that always helped me, and helped me understand myself. Living with undiagnosed disabilities forces you to live a life that your body can't handle. And so you end up pushing yourself beyond your limits. And that tends to lead to a lot of social conflicts and falling outs with people, misunderstandings, meltdowns, all types of things, just emotional overwhelm. And writing is one of the only things that I found ever helped me be okay with that. Because long before I had any type of, diagnostic explanation, or this is an autistic meltdown, or you're being sensory overwhelmed, or we have different communication methods that are leading to these, misunderstandings. All I knew was the head. I just kept hitting the wall, and people were always mad at me for reasons I couldn't understand. And I just felt alone. And writing is the best thing for a person who feels alone. So it was always like something that soothed me and helped me and tried to help me make sense of the world around me. And it just means the world to me, and it saved my life on countless occasions. So, when I got to a different place in my life where I wanted to pursue something, like as a career-wise, it only made sense to give all of me to writing, because writing gave all of itself to me.
Mm. Wow, that's very quotable in itself. And I read a quote from you as well that the classes you like to teach are different, right? They're for folks that are neurodivergent, perhaps have run into walls like you're talking about, yourself. And I read a quote that said, "It's easy if you write how your brain wants you to write." How did you come up with that?
I've had to do a lot of justifying for my approach to writing, to other writers, especially in educational settings. Most people approach engaging with the craft of writing in a very specific way, a very traditional way that involves you write a draft, you get feedback from someone, you make edits, you come back again, you get more feedback, you make more edits, and then you are allegedly happy with this final product. I don't like feedback. I do not. I do not like feedback, especially when it's negative. I'm very sensitive to it. It breaks me down. I like positive feedback. It allows me to focus on the things that are working good, and it makes me feel better about the work. My mind generally likes not to be critiqued or attacked or told negative things about itself. And since I was writing about myself for most of my life, if you're critiquing my writing, my brain sees it as you're critiquing me, and now we can't be friends, and I have to block you. I'm sorry. Not sorry. But as
that's
far
how
as,
we do it in 2023.
Listen, I go to therapy, but I also block people. So as far as writing how your brain wants you to write, I've developed an approach that prioritizes each person's needs, allows them to come to writing exactly where they are. A lot of old school writing advice that is still very present teaches people that if you want to be a serious writer, you must write every day. You have to do it this way. What if you're someone with a chronic fatigue syndrome, or you're someone with a disability, any type of disability, whether it's apparent or otherwise, and your body does not, your brain, your energy levels do not allow you to write in that way, but you have deep things that you need to explore that writing helps you do. What if you only write once a month? Are you not serious about your craft? And who's to say that once a month writing isn't doing more for you than someone who's showing up to the page every single day and banging out 3,000 words, At the end of the day, we all have different needs and abilities, and I believe in helping everyone that I come across who I teach writing to, helping them find a practice of writing that helps them in a healthy way, that doesn't force them to be anything they're not. And I believe that the results are much more beneficial, both to the final product and what the writing world gets, and to the person themselves, than doing it another way.
It sounds like a really liberating approach, that allows each person to tap into and be comfortable with who they are and how they write and what works for them. That's interesting, because we do get whatever the profession is. There's the so-called experts, right, who tell us the way it's supposed to be, and I think can tend to make us feel bad about ourselves if we don't do it that way, right?
Absolutely.
So
that's all
sounds
that advice
extremely
ever did to me.
liberating, and you're teaching a class tomorrow, as a matter of fact, right? Is that going to be online or in person?
That class is in person at the Loft Literary Center.
Okay.
It's a teen class. It's called Writing as a Neurodivergent Teen. I think so. Yeah, I'm not good with titles, but it's basically a neurodivergent approach to writing for teen writers. Yeah, basically what I just talked about, but focused on a teen audience.
That's exactly what it's called. I'm looking it up here. I got this from your website this morning. It's called Writing as a Neurodivergent Teen.
There I go, doubting myself.
There you go. It's happening on September 23rd at the Loft. So where is the Loft located these days? I know it used to be in Prospect Park.
It's inside of the Open Book building.
I'm sorry.
Open Book?
Open Book.
Yeah, in the Open Book building on Washington Street. It's like 3 blocks from the U.S. Bank Stadium. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Now that you say that, I have seen it. I've driven by it and seen it. Okay. Very cool. Tell us, more about, some of the things that you're doing now. We know that you're teaching. Tell us about your book. It was, in 2022, and it's titled, as you said, Are You Borg Now? And I'm sorry, I'm not sophisticated with Borg, but isn't that a Star Trek reference? Okay, so I'll look forward to hearing more about that. And it was actually an award finalist for 2022 Minnesota Book of the Year. That's pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, I was definitely very grateful for, and not expecting it, but very grateful to have gotten that recognition. It's I used to think that because I'm an all or nothing thinker, if you don't, or I think it was that Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last.
Oh yeah. One of the more quotable movies. I love that movie.
Yeah, but I mean, in retrospect, it opened a lot of doors for me, and it was a big accomplishment to have someone's first book be recognized at that level, especially in my category, memoir and creative nonfiction, which is historically the most competitive category. So just to make it to that stage was a major accomplishment that I didn't realize until I moved further away from that moment. Because in that moment, all I could think about was I lost, But it's all good. The book is about me. It's an experimental memoir. It has different elements to it. One of the things that I needed to do with that book was write about traumatic past events in a way that did not re-traumatize me or protected me as much as possible while engaging with those traumatic past events. And so I stumbled upon a format that was working for me. Partially I stole from things that I saw in other books that were like calling out to me, partially from conversations with my mentor, Douglas Kearney, who is an award-winning poet and professor at the University of Minnesota. But it was a self-dialogue technique between me, my adult self, and then also my inner child, where we have this conversation, extended convo throughout the book, and we're just asking each other questions. And the reason for the title, Are You Borg Now? B-O-R-G. The Borg are, I'll explain it, I guess, now, yeah. The Borg are a species in Star Trek. They're like one of the big evil species. And they go around from planet to planet, assimilating entire planets. And so when they defeat you, they don't just like kill you and take all your resources. Once they finally defeated you, they make you a part of their collective. You become, they call it literally assimilation. The Borg, they're like cyborgs too. So they're like half human and then also have half all these cybernetic implants. You become a drone in their collective. You no longer have an individual voice. You don't have individual thoughts. You don't have any culture, faith, language, background, all of that is erased. You become a mindless drone that is plugged into the gigantic collective, serving the needs of the collective. Whatever the hive mind needs for you to do, that's what you do. You might have been a farmer in your past life. You may end up becoming someone who's the ship's engineer, because that is the role that is needed for you. So I asked myself at some point in the book, are you Borg now? One of my versions is asking the other version, are you Borg now? Have you become Borg now? Have you been so fully assimilated into whatever it is that you were trying to become that you no longer have an individual sense of self, you know?
Which is a really deep question. Well, we don't want to spoil it for the readers. I'm looking forward to, did we get the answer to that question if we read the book?
No, there are no answers in that book. Yes, there are no answers.
More questions than answers.
Absolutely. A whole lot of questions. Yeah.
Which is also a great way to allow the reader to explore their own sort of inner selves, if you will.
Absolutely.
Just as you were talking, I think as human beings do, I'm relating it back to my own life and some of those concepts of my inner child and those conversations and how they relate now. It's really a fascinating concept. You mentioned your mentor, Douglas, I believe you said, did you sort of come up with this concept together, or, it's really an interesting approach?
No, I think the way my mind processes information, I absorb bits and pieces and it coalesces over time, and then eventually it comes out in the writing, and I don't have language to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. It just kind of comes out. And so that's why it's always been historically hard for me to talk about my writing, because I couldn't break down to you the specific mechanisms or the reasons. All I know is I love asking questions. I love talking about this stuff, and I love absorbing information from all different types of art and things that might not even be art. And my mind just moves it around in the background while I'm doing other things. Maybe I'm playing Madden or something. And then eventually at some point I'll decide to write, and I might not even be sure what I'm going to write. And halfway through something pops out and I just go with it. And that's exactly what happened with this. I was in a coffee shop and, I was writing and I just felt like asking myself a question, and then I responded to the question. And that was it for the next 3 months. That's all I did. It was just a flurry. It came out all at once.
That is really cool. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. Will you autograph it for me when I get my copy?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
100%.
Awesome. And you also, just outside of teaching and writing, you have been helping some folks with their careers as sort of a career navigator, advocate, if you will. And tell us more about that. What's that experience been like?
Yeah, it's been educational. It's been rewarding. At times challenging, but overall, definitely the type of mission-driven work that I've been interested in doing for a while. I was focused on writing and teaching for the last, maybe 5 years. And the more I became interested in understanding how I relate to the world via disability, the more I learned about how things are. And the more I became interested in helping others. I've always wanted to help others, but working in a role or a field that allowed me to directly impact other disabled people's lives. Because I have my own challenges for sure. Don't let the accolades fool you. Life is challenging for me most of the time. I'm grateful for the supports that I do have, and for the people in my life. But I also recognize that I have, strengths too. And those strengths and the experiences that I've had could be used to help other people who also have challenges, who also have strengths, because we all have different ways of being in this world. So it's been good. It's been good overall for sure. That's
great. Yeah. And I completely agree with that, and it relates really back to something you talked about with your teachings and writing, in that you're helping people kind of tap into their strengths and their styles as a writer, and not be afraid to sort of proceed that way, just because maybe the quote unquote experts are telling us you need to do it a different way. It's a lot like, what APSI really promotes and supports, the customized employment practices that are out there. They're not a one-size-fit-all belief. It's a belief that anybody that wants to work can work, and everybody will have their own individual path to get there. A lot like, what you're talking about with your writing. So I could see how, as a career navigator in supporting other people, that just that concept would be helpful. And I like what you say about we all have challenges and we all have strengths. I haven't met anyone that doesn't fall into that category. No,
absolutely.
We all get support, and we get it in different ways.
Absolutely.
That's great stuff. Well, I'd love to, actually, I want to go back to something you said about Borgs and different planets. Just a question for you. I've been hearing a lot about this. I think what's it called? The something Webb Johnson or something like that telescope.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you been
telescope.
following? What's it called again?
I think it's something Webb telescope.
Something
maybe?
Webb.
Yeah.
Let's defer to our producer here. Do you know the name of it? James Webb. Okay, I knew there was a J in there. The James Webb telescope. Have you been looking at some of that?
Yeah, I've seen some of the images for sure. Yeah, they're absolutely breathtaking, mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is mind-blowing to just think about the galaxies that could exist out there, or do exist.
Yeah.
But I guess, of course, this isn't we're not taking a position here. I'm just, everybody might not believe that, but I find it absolutely fascinating. And when you were talking about the Borgs going from planet to planet.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, how many.
Yeah,
what if there's a galaxy out there right now where there's a gigantic battle for the control of the galaxy between 2 or 3 major species that are technology advanced, and then all these other smaller species are just kind of like watching, waiting to see who wins. Is the benevolent rulers or the more the violent rulers? What's going to happen? And we're over here worried about, oh man.
And if there's planets like ours, how are they doing it? How did they evolve as whatever they call themselves, whether it's human beings or, Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. So let's, on sort of that expansive mindset, let's talk about hopes and dreams. We always like to, as we're starting to wind down, ask our guests, what are the hopes and dreams you have, for, it's a big question, but for the landscape of employment, for people with disabilities?
It's, as someone who has struggled to get accommodations myself, one of the reasons, as I said earlier, that I was forced to go get that paperwork, the formal diagnosis, was because at the time my school was giving me a hard time about getting accommodations. They wanted me to teach in person, and I was like, I don't have the ability right now. I can only do online. And it was like after when that first pivot back to in person was happening after the corona. And so I had to go through hell just to be able to get the support that I needed. And it's been a similar story. And I've seen a similar story now in my current role, and just seeing how challenging it is for people to get very, very, very simple and easily doable accommodations from these gigantic corporations. It's just, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is ableism and people not recognizing disabled people's humanity and saying, well, because you have challenges in this area, it's not going to look good for us. You know what I mean? And it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, life is way too short, and people are in entirely too much pain for us to be telling people how their disability is an inconvenience to us as an employer or whatever. And I'm not singling anyone out, but it's a common theme that I have seen from lived experience, from work, from other friends that I've talked to. So my hope for change in this world would be to allow people to be who they are, and accept them for who they are, and not to have to make them jump through all these hoops I remember one employer before I had a formal diagnosis, other than just, I guess, depression and anxiety before all this stuff. They made me jump through hoops for a year, and I had to contact my therapist and get this paperwork and fill out this form. And long story short, they were just yanking my chain. Like, they just really wanted me to get out of there and making the work a hostile environment for me. And I was like, why didn't you just say that? I would have left. Why did you put me through a year of hardship and emotional turmoil? So whether it's in a work setting or in a school setting, because there's a similar thing with higher ed, I'm not as familiar with the accommodation process for K through 12, but for higher ed, there's this clunky, gigantic, overburdened system of trying to get accommodations that you have to go through with this Disability Resources Center. And then they send a letter out to your professor. And at the end of the day, the professor is the one who decides whether he's going to give you accommodations or not, or he or she, they. So it's like one of the reasons why I design my classes the way I do whenever I teach is I don't require you. What if you're someone like me who doesn't have a diagnosis or who isn't even aware that they have a diagnosis? Mm-hmm. Something as simple as ADHD makes it extremely challenging to do assignments on time, to be on time to class, to miss class sometimes. If you don't have that, if you're not in that place in your life and you still want to be successful in school, who am I to say that the way I design my classes is going to impact you negatively? So my approach is I'm going to assume that everyone in my class has the potential to have some undiagnosed something or something that they're struggling with that they don't yet have language for, and that they deserve to be just as much of a part of this class without being traumatized as anyone else. I use an approach called universal design for learning, and it's this idea that the way we're doing things now, where we have this siloed system of people have to go through the medical system. Once they do that, then they go through the disability center. Once they do that, then they go to the professor, and they have to have negotiations with all of their professors every semester. Instead of doing it that way, because that is so time consuming and taxing and challenging, especially for somebody with any type of illness or disability, why don't we design our classes assuming that everyone needs to be met where they are without making them prove anything? Why not just believe them? Why not just help them? Why not get around the problem before it becomes a problem? So it's things as simple as not penalizing for late work, not taking attendance, not taking points off for something being misspelled or grammar or anything like that, giving opportunities for extra credit, using labor-based contract grading, where it's the idea that if you do the minimum work, if you do this certain number of assignments throughout the semester, you are guaranteed this grade, even if you turn those assignments in. If you do slightly more than that, you will get a fantastic grade. So taking that approach, a trauma-informed, compassionate approach that assumes everyone has some type of challenges, even if they're not able to express it, and creating that safe learning environment, I find has had much better results in their overall takeaways and also their overall understanding of how to take care of themselves in an education setting. So the same thing with that, same thing with the work settings. Like, just let people be who they are, help them, don't make them jump through hoops. It's not hard. Like, life is short. Don't make it any harder than it has to be.
Yeah. You know? Just, on that note, there are systems out there that we have to navigate through. And like Shaiye, I dream of a world where we could just meet people where they're at and help people with sort of just that open understanding. It's a really important message. I'd just like to, thank everybody for listening in today. On behalf of Shaiye, thank you so much for coming in and sharing this time with us. And remember out there, if you can believe it, you can achieve it.